Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks podcast. I am your host, Darshan Kulkarni. As you may remember, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist. I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have an interest or work with an FDA regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. So, one of the big things, as you may know, is if you are a pharmaceutical company, if you're a medical device company, it's very likely that you are going to connect with pharmacists. And when you're connecting with pharmacists, it's one of those professions that gets almost forgotten because pharma tends to keep looking at physicians. And there's nothing wrong with looking at physicians, but you need to consider the entire value chain, and that includes pharmacists. The second part of that is as pharmacists are often the only other direct connection to patients outside physicians, and that has not been leveraged from a patient centricity viewpoint. And the Pharmacy Podcast Network is a way to connect to these pharmacists. So if you are in advertising and you're trying to connect with pharmacists, if you are in medical affairs and you're going, what are pharmacists talking about? If you are in compliance and going, are there do I have clients um, who are maybe saying the wrong thing, and we need to figure out how to talk to our pharmacy correctly? You should be listening to this podcast because we're going to be talking to Todd Eury, and he is an absolute master. He was actually nominated for 40 under, I think, the 40 most famous healthcare influencers. Todd, I may have gotten that right or wrong, so feel free to change that in a few seconds. But if you like this, I'd love to have you on, ask questions, leave a comment, subscribe. But let's talk a little bit about Todd. He was previously vice president of sales and marketing at the Pharmacy Buying Group Innovator. He is founder and advisory board member at Shift Health and a founder at Pharmacy Future Leaders. And he is currently founder and CEO of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. The Pharmacy Podcast Network is the first and only network focused on podcasts, which joins pharmacy businesses to develop better patient-focused solutions. So we at the Pharmacy Podcast Network has over 78,000 listeners focused on the pharmacy profession. So, ladies and gentlemen, our guest today, Todd Eury. Thank you, Todd, for coming on.
Thank you, Darshan. This is an absolute pleasure. I'm usually the one interviewing, so it's strange to get interviewed. And then by you're one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to. So this is fun.
You're very kind. You are always a wealth of information, and I always appreciate listening to you. So thank you for coming on. But let's sort of start a little bit from the beginning, because I've known you for, I want to say at this point, probably about 10 years. That sounds about right. When did you start the Pharmacy Podcast Network, and why did you start it?
It was selfish. It was I was driving an hour and 10 minutes one way to get to the Pittsburgh International Airport. I was consulting not only little tiny buying groups that were trying to come up into the ranks against some of the largest buying groups in our nation, but I was also dealing with pharmacy software systems, SuiteRx, Keycentrix, RX30. I was doing some consulting work and working with them and really trying to merge workflows and technology with custom APIs and just doing as much as I could. I was a kind of a cornucopia of things per se. And when I was traveling, there's absolutely nothing, zero to listen to on podcast form other than the Gradens. Terry Graden and his wife are both pharmacists. They've done the People's Pharmacy podcasts, which is really a consumer-facing podcast. They're amazing. And they've done that since 2008. But in 2009, there's just nothing to listen to from a business perspective. So I was like, that's it. I'm just going to start interviewing people that can turn around and teach me something. And I was the biggest listener of my own podcast because I think I listened to the episodes back then multiple times just to learn from my guest. And it was an invaluable resource to myself. And then, of course, it started to percolate out there in the interspheres and the interwebs.
But you said this started from 2000, like you started 2009 is what I think you said, correct?
March 2nd.
And March 2nd, 2009. So in a month, happy anniversary.
Thank you. I'm excited. Yeah, our 12th year come out.
Well, that should be exciting. So here's a question. You said that the Gradens had started their podcast before you.
Yep.
What did they talk about, and what made you want to listen to them? I mean, you weren't a pharmacist. Like, why do you even care?
Yes, exactly. So I entered pharmacy in 2004 in pharmacy management systems dedicated to institutional pharmacy. It was a system called Framework LTC. First Windows-based, SQL-based open database system, which meant that a pharmacy operator could do some really cool things with their data that you couldn't do with some of the closed character-based software systems that were out there. And when I was selling those systems, or really consulting more to say, by asking a lot of questions, I knew nothing about pharmacy. I knew nothing about pharmacists. I knew a lot about technology, and I knew came from the telecom industry. So I knew how information packets got from point A to point Z. And I thought of that as in workflow, for example. But what I noticed quickly, Darshan, is there was nothing out there to support the profession from a media perspective. There were some blogs, there were some state and national associations, but nobody was getting intimate with what was the business of pharmacy at the time. I started my own blog called the Pharmacy Technology Resource, and that was a way to talk about how technology impacted operations in pharmacy. And that was from a limited view. It was from institutional long-term care pharmacy perspective. But I quickly started linking up with other pharmacists that were informatics specialists, and they had workflow expertise, and they ran pharmacies. And that was exciting to me. So I've just been a fan of pharmacy for as long as, I've been in the industry, because I know the effectiveness based on data. I was soaked in data every day. So I saw the outcomes. I saw how a geriatric patient started on a medication, had been on 16 medications, and then a year later they came down to 9 medications, and they were technically healthier. Why?
Right.
Because there was a pharmacist involved. So
Right.
and that kind of stuff gives me chills, because I think that pharmacists are underutilized. They're under engaged in the entire health continuum of really helping people to live better. And I just see the power. So I feel like I'm a reflector right now, and I'm just taking as much of the audio stories that have been built out over the last 12 years to accentuate back to our profession of healthcare, how incredible pharmacists are.
So, just so you know, we got a message from Joe Friedman saying Todd's very creative, always comes up with great ideas that cover emerging opportunities in pharmacy. So, Todd, you have many, many fans amongst us, don't you?
He's awesome. He's my go-to for medical cannabis, and he actually is helping me launch a new podcast called the CRX Podcast. You can find that at crxpodcast.com, which is in conjunction with a partnership with the CRX magazine, who focuses specifically on writing evidence-based and editorial stories for the physician, pharmacist, nurse practitioner team. So I am so excited about that opportunity.
Quick question, Todd. You said it was the crxpodcast.com?
Yep. crxpodcast.com. That'll take you to the magazine. It's kind of like a holding space until we get the podcast going, because we don't actually have it yet.
So as you can see on the scroll bar below, crxpodcast.com.
Yep.
So Todd, you talk about pharmacists being under engaged and underutilized. Right? It's one of those things that I've always believed in, but this is a personal perspective at this point. I find that most pharmacy schools have taken this position that pharmacists need to be at the patient bedside. And I'm not taking away from the value of pharmacists there, because I've seen the changes and the difference that makes firsthand. But I feel like when they made that decision, they almost said everything else is less important. And you've interviewed and you've spoken to and you've had podcasters from a variety of other dimensions of pharmacy. My question to you is, could you talk a little bit about what those other dimensions are? How are those voices being heard on your network? And do you see people getting value from that?
Absolutely. The most exciting thing that I found happening, and it's increasing now with the popularity of the platform, is
Todd, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, but what is the? How can people find your platform again?
pharmacypodcast.com. So it's pharmacypodcast.com. And if you Google pharmacypodcast.com and then you put in almost any other word under the pharmacy sector, artificial intelligence, pharmacypodcast.com, medication adherence, pharmacypodcast.com, software,
Right.
you'll probably find some conversation that has happened over the last 12 years about that subject, which is kind of cool. So Pharmacy Podcast has 32 hosts that focus on specific vertical themes or topics that they become in charge of, they become in to drive. And podcasting is one thing, but that's not even what this network is about. The network is about the connection of our leaders in our on our sector. Dr. Ann Arvizu, who concentrates on changing a professional's life in the way that you see yourself, the insightfulness of yourself, through her system called the Corepreneur podcast, and the Corepreneur of strengthening your mental core. And Becky Winslow, Dr. Winslow, who focuses on pharmacogenomics, and Bruce Nealand, who focuses on community pharmacy, and Brooke Kalusich, who took over the Gavel and Pestle podcast, which is your old podcast where you started, Darshan, which was amazing. You did such a good job with that. There is a collection of experts, some of the most beautiful minds in pharmacy that are on our network. And what's happening is, while they're talking to our listeners 6 days a week, 4 weeks out of the month, pumping out 24 episodes on average per month, the interconnection of business and consultancy and people helping each other, and some of these people joining forces that have nothing to do with the Pharmacy Podcast. Our network is doing exactly what I intended it to do. And I almost think of it as an incubator of audio-driven thoughts and sharing one's mind and sharing insights to make things happen, and to support and to build advocacy and to build excitement for pharmacists, because you're a pharmacist and you can't be your own fan unless you're unless you're into that. But I'm your fan. So I look at things from a patient's perspective. I look at things as a business guy who's been soaking in pharmacy since 2004. And I bring a lot of knowledge, collective knowledge, from every facet of pharmacy, drug development, distribution, buying, technology, and I'm able to kind of be the guy behind the green curtain, trying to pull the right levers to get pharmacists to interconnect with so many different facets of our healthcare system. And I'm doing that through audio. So it's so exciting to be in this position.
Now that's an interesting concept. You said two different things, and the focus on everything you said is it's an incubator of audio-driven thoughts. You talked about the focus on audio. My question to you is: everyone talks about doing for example, we're doing a streamcast right now.
Yep.
Do you see the Pharmacy Podcast being necessarily always audio, or will it always have an audio component, i.e., YouTube would be part of it? What is your take on that? How do you see that future, if you will?
Yep. So traditionally, when podcasting came out in the 90s, and then it resurrected in the early 2000s, and now only in the last 3 years has it really become explosive, where now Wall Street is paying attention to the $1.5 billion that's going to be generated by ad revenue in 2021, which is really exciting. And that's not even how we sustain this organization. It's not driven by ad revenue. It's literally driven by organizations who believe in the facet of audio branding. But when you think of audio, we want to stay primarily in audio, even though we are doing video. We've done a YouTube event called rxfusion.live, which is a live event through YouTube once a week on Fridays at 1 p.m. That's has multiple co-hosts that bring things. It's more of like a stat episode per se that really talks about the industry, almost like talk radio. And we're going to be doing more video, but podcasting has always traditionally been audio only. And it's supposed to be, because that's an element of your senses that has been underutilized because of the dawn of everything else that is bright and shiny. And with our attention deficit and with TikTok and with, all the YouTube and everything, we've lost and or forgot the importance of learning and consuming information through audio. There was a paper written by Dr. Catherine Best called The Visual, Audio, and Kinetic Effects of Memory Retention Based on Audio. And I actually picked up another book as well called Evidence-Based Practice and Competencies in Healthcare and the Importance of Using Audio in Learning. So there's a facet of learning, there's a facet of information collection that the Pharmacy Podcast Network has really honed in on, which is all based on audio. We're going to continue to lead with audio, but most definitely, Darshan, we have to be cognizant of what the markets are demanding, and they definitely demand some video too.
So now you're going towards audio. You're talking about the vision of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Let me ask you a couple of basics for someone who's going, you know what? I'm not ready yet to be on Todd's platform. It's just too many people, but I want to start something. I want to get comfortable with my voice. What are some basics you tell someone who's starting out? First of all, do I need to be a experienced licensed pharmacist to start? Do I need to be a pharmacist at all? Do I need to have a certain tone or timbre to my voice to do this? What do you think?
So I think there's a element of, we're in an age of social media. We're in an age of me too, me too, me too. Sometimes we're in an age where people want to get noticed for whatever reason. I really want things to be very purposeful. So I've had lots of questions from many pharmacists about starting podcasts. And my first question is why you want to start a podcast. And you don't have to there is no right answer. It's really a very personal thing. But what I do want to encourage is if you're a professional, and if you're in healthcare, and if you're a pharmacist, and that's layering up, you're a professional, you're in healthcare, and now you're a pharmacist, and you're going to put out something in audio form, you better do it right, because that's your professional reputation, and you're actually held to a higher level of authority in what you're saying than even me, because I'm not a pharmacist, and I don't have my PharmD, and I didn't take the NAPLEX and get my state license, but you did. So you have to think, why are you starting a podcast? From a quality perspective, that's not as important. Consistency is very important. That is, if you're going to start building an audience through audio, you better put out something at least once every 30 days just to stay in that cadence of content creation. And then you better really know what you're talking about, unless you preface it with, like we did this morning when we started talking, where you said, hey, this is just my ideas, or this is just my insights. But pharmacists need to understand that now that we've driven a lot of attention, the APHA has been resurrected. A lot of the state of pharma associations are having brand new branding and marketing campaigns. There's more attention on the pharmacist today than ever before, especially when we had the president of the United States, Joe Biden, actually call out to pharmacists and saying how important they are in administering the vaccines for this pandemic. So there's a ton of focus on pharmacists. If you want to start a podcast, I commend you and I say, great, let's do it. But do it correctly and make sure that you present yourself not only professionally, but that you give your listener and your audience a lot of preface to what you are trying to accomplish. Because today, Darshan, there's about 1.6 million podcasts out there, and you have a lot to compete with. And the Pharmacy Podcast, by the way, if you're a pharmacist in your podcast, we would love to help you in some way, even getting you exposure like we did with, I've done with, just because we have 32 hosts, that doesn't mean I don't help other podcasters out. We've helped many podcasters out in just getting exposure for their content. But there's a lot to think about. And I think there's more to it than just picking up a Yeti microphone from Amazon and plugging it into your computer and start talking.
And I think that's really important, isn't it? It's people start talking and then there's a major drop-off rate. I believe the number is like 7 podcasts and then people sort of just give up. Do you have any insight as to why people give up? Why do they not find that doing it works for them after, say, about 7 podcasts?
Yeah, I think we're asking that question for our audience because you absolutely know this answer, Darshan, and that is because podcasting done right is a lot of work. It is a tremendous amount of work. I can't believe until 2018, Darshan, I was working a 40, 50 hour a week position and doing what I had to do to generate money for myself and my family. And I absolutely loved doing it. Came out of a position with New Season as director of strategy, where I was traveling to 82 different centers across the country, 4 days a week, 3 days a week, all over the place, mostly Florida, where their headquarters was at, doing presentations for pharmacists and getting pharmacists involved with comorbidity for patients that were suffering with opioid usage disorder. And it was an awesome position. But I'd come home on a Thursday night or a Friday morning, Darshan, and I had to jump in and pump out 4 podcasts over the weekend. And let me tell you what, that was a huge strain on my marriage and my family, trying to work a full-time job and then coming home and putting an extra 18 to 20 hours additional in a week just to run a publication. So when I jumped off the entrepreneurial cliff in 2019 and did this solely, it was a blessing, not only to myself, not only to this publication, but to my family, to really take flight. And it has grown probably tenfold in just the last 12 months than it ever did the previous 10 years, just because of the focus that I've really been able to put into it.
Which is really interesting because it speaks to the entrepreneurial spirit that you a few minutes ago actually talked about the value of in pharmacists. How did you decide to make the jump?
It was nerve-wracking. What your bills are, the amount of money that's coming in, what you're supposed to be saving. And me jumping off the cliff, it didn't equal that with regards to income of what I left. It's slowly rising back up to reaching that point, and now expansion I think is going to become exponential, especially really in the next 12 months. But it had to. I either needed to get rid of it in order to do it, have someone else do it correctly because the pharmacy industry deserved that, or I needed to jump in and do it myself. And when you create something, even like Darshan Talks, it becomes kind of like one of your children per se of one of your creations. And there was no way I was going to let someone else get a hold of what's about to happen within our publication before I really got it off the ground. But I do see myself just as a tickler to the audience and anybody that follows me. I do see things accelerating, and I see me fading away from the Pharmacy Podcast Network someday to get involved in something much more important.
Oh, that's just a tease at this point, Todd. That's not even fair. But so what I'm hearing you say is you're going to pull a Jeff Bezos or a Bill Gates, if you will, and you will have someone else run this empire. You'll still be chairman, or on the board of directors.
Correct.
But that's where you see. Okay, so let's ask a different version of the question. The network has been focused on the business, as you said, of pharmacy.
Yep.
When I always talk about the connection to the life sciences. Obviously, I have a huge component in pharmacy. I do a lot of work in pharmacy. But talk to me about how you help pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, cannabis companies, cosmetics companies, food companies interact with pharmacists using the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
That's an awesome question. It really helps me lead into the vision of where we're going, too, as a publication. Yeah. So, all right. So a pharma company who has been very reluctant to jumping into anything social media. There's been lots of, legal paranoia and what they say and how they say it. They are softening up to podcasting. And Eli Lilly has been an amazing client of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. They've taught us a lot about evidence-based production of information, and then relaying that information in a way where it sounds natural without sounding too scripted, but then doing it in a way where you have an understanding of what they're trying to get across. And they started with Trulicity, which was an awesome product that I've learned so much about. And then they've gone upstream into the Lilly Diabetes Center and some other things. So what's happening is organizations, let's pick on pharma for now, are realizing that audio has been underutilized. I'm not the only one that sees this. And they know that people are getting used to jogging, exercising. I always say chopping vegetables or doing something, driving, doing something where you are primarily able to use your hearing in order to ingest information. We're in an age where there's so much information. When you get some downtime and you have, like me, if I have some downtime where I can learn something as I'm exercising or walking, Darshan, there's never a time that I'm not listening to something in order to learn. So with that comes a responsibility of the entity to deliver things through audio that are in fact real and true and not fake news. So the element of what we've called evidence-based podcasting and evidence-based audio is so important. And that is really the future of myself and what I'm going to drive and who we're going to be partnering with several schools of pharmacy, several universities, several journals. All of these organizations are finally saying, which I brought this attention up to them about 3 years ago, and nobody was ready for it. I used to get asked, back in 2012, well, what's a podcast? And nobody asked that anymore. Everybody knows what that is. So I think our healthcare life sciences industry is ready to level up audio, and I'm going to be a driving factor in doing exactly that.
So it's funny you talk about that. We're talking about leveling up. So let me ask you a really basic question. How did they even reach you, or did they reach you, or did you reach out to them? How did that happen? How does it happen for you?
So most of the time, if I try to reach out to them, it's an endless road of who to find. Even though I'm really good at LinkedIn and finding the right people. I was approached by a public relations company who already had a relationship with Eli Lilly, and they've been an amazing partner in bringing some other opportunities to us. And then I really started learning the publishing game. So I started building other relationships with other public relations company who were very much focused on healthcare, life sciences, and pharmacy. That has really accelerated our publication and the type of information that we're getting out, as well as letting those publications know they have every ability to use our content at their whim and will. And primarily we embed all of our content in other environments. I don't drive people back to the website. Our pharmacypodcast.com is really just to say, hey, we have a website. Here's who we are. Here's what we do. Here's our hosts. But the importance, the actual physical information, that's being used by our clients. That's being used by, the companies themselves, which is part of our strategy.
So I usually aim for these to be about 15, 20 minutes, as you know, but I want to round this off a little bit by talking about you personally. So I'm going to do a new segment, and you're going to be the first person I'm doing this segment with. So the segment is a rapid fire round.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you 6 questions. You're going to answer what comes to your mind. So first one, what is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
The Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Okay. Who is your heroine and why? Favorite heroine or hero and why?
I've always been a Han Solo fan, just because of he always seemed like he was always playing against the odds, and he always made it out because of how tenacious he was. And I consider myself tenacious.
I love it. What is your favorite way to give back to your community?
Doing as much as I can through exposure. I'm very good at digital exposure. So working with a family right here in Brownsville, Pennsylvania, which is my hometown, called Team Livy, team and an Livi. She is a 10-year-old who was diagnosed with cancer, and I used the podcast platform to push out an episode that has helped to raise money. So anything that I can do to use my digital exposure and authority and influence to do something else for someone else, it brings me joy to do that.
What challenges you?
Time management. I am horrible at it. I'm a follow the bright and shiny ball, and if you shine something in front of me that is interesting to me, I can't help but to run after it.
Okay. How has COVID changed how you balance your work and personal life?
It's made me realize that we can't be in front of each other anymore, which is where I present best, is in person. And not having that, I've had to refine, my own communication skills via virtual, via phone, and then of course in writing form as well. So it's been a teacher.
And your last question, how do you define success?
I define success by how well you can empower others and being able to see those individuals that you've empowered actually have some measurable outcome. And I've seen that happen through the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I've seen so many of our hosts get recognition, and you can't believe what joy that's brought me to be able to see that.
Okay, Todd, I'm going to recap. During this podcast, we talked about how you started. We talked about the under-engagement and underutilization of pharmacists. We talked about how the Pharmacy Podcast Network is an incubator of audio-driven thoughts, and we talked about the evolution and the value of audio, starting from I don't know what a podcast is, can you tell me about it, all the way through to how do I get involved and how do I start my own podcast. We talked about you partnering with companies like Eli Lilly and talking about evidence-based audio. You talk about the partnerships you have with that are upcoming with journals and with schools and also with publications and PR companies. Did I miss anything?
No, I think rounding it out in 3 divisions. Division number 1 is our traditional division. That's the editorials. That's what's out there now. Division number 2 is our educational platform, which is the Uber podcasting platform for student pharmacists to develop content for fellow student pharmacists to help them with their studies. And platform number 3 is evidence-based podcasting. That is rising the level of quality of audio in a medical and health sciences world to ensure that what we're listening to is in fact evidence-based.
Todd, how can people reach you?
You could Google Pharmacy Podcast. You'll find me. Google my name, Todd Eury. You'll find me. Call me 412-585-4001 or email me, which you can find me at Eury, EURY, at pharmacypodcast.com.
Awesome. So if you like this podcast, I'm sorry, Todd, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was going to say thank you so much, Darshan. Like I said, I've been a fan of yours for years and of Darshan Talks. You guys and Major, you are an amazing. I wish I had a major. I need a major.
I'm very blessed to have Major. You caught ways to reach him. If you like this podcast, please leave a comment. Please subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or just go to our website, Darshan Talks. And thank you again, Todd, for coming on. We'd love to have you on again.
Thank you. Thank you.